Hello, everybody. I'm Marta Mun from the prescription department of mmerling. I'll talk about shutter boxes and passive houses. Everybody knows solar radiation is a problem in our area. And if we look at the average solar irradiation, there are differences depending on where we live in our country. But in summer, it is a global problem throughout all the Spanish territory. So what happens in a passive house building? Well, the first thing we have to remember is that a passive house building is airtight and has high thermal insulation. And if on top of it we have high solar irradiation, we have a high risk of overheating. What options do we have to avoid this? Well, I think we all know them really, really well. First of all, bioclimatic design and also shading elements, which would be active elements. And in this case, we're going to focus in the inner roller shutter box. So what features do we need in a passive house? Well, of the five pillars of a passive house building, the shutter box is directly or indirectly is going to play a role here. When we're talking about air permeability, the first thing that we have to take into account that not all shutter boxes are the same. A good window with a bad shutter box is a bad window. What criteria should we demand from one? First of all, it has to have class 4 air permeability, which is the most important one. How do we achieve this? First of all, developing really well the product so that the clipping of the blends of the shutter box are airtight and we'll avoid filtration. Secondly, in the two top ends, in the end piece, we carry out a perimetral study, and then something that we don't take into account but which is extremely important when we have a slat, what we have to make sure that they have an EPDM junction so that the space between the shutter box and the slat is smaller, so there's less air circulation in that area. When we're talking about thermal insulation, it is going to isolate the shutter box, so we need a shutter box that is insulated inside. To optimize thermal insulation, we have to focus on two things. First of all, thermal conductivity of the material, so we're talking of lambdas of 0.35 minus 0.35 watts MKs, and we're going to look for geometry with continuity in the insulation line. On the marketplace, you will find many different shutter boxes with 1 centimeter plates like we see here. So they're going to be cold sides to it. If we develop a little bit more the geometry, depending on where the window is, we're going to be able to have some cold areas. But if we even work on it further, we're going to be able to have continuity in the insulation. When we talk about the thermal bridge, we also have to take into account two positions of the shutter box. One, with respect to the frame, it's important to display it with larger roller guides. We have a case with 40, but there are cold parts on the frame. With an 85, it's displaced a little bit more. And with a 115 guide, we can see that it improves very much more, and the thermal bridge is smaller. The other element that we have to take into account is the shutter box and the insulation line of the wall. It has to be as continuous as possible. We have a thermoclay wall and we have a high bridge if we leave it in this position, but if we displace it with a thermal clay, then the bridge will go down, but the values are lower when that window is aligned with the insulation, as you can see in this image. The fourth issue that we have to take into account is installation. How useful is a badly installed window? Useless. So we have to take into account the 4 planes, like with a window. Item 1, outside, we have to make sure that there's water tightness, air tightness. In the middle, we need to have continuity of insulation, and inside we have to make sure that there are no infiltrations in the thermal insulation, and we need to seal the frame and the shutter box. Every junction has to be treated with passive house techniques, and in the end, this is a topic that we've been covering for a very, very long time. This is an image of our stand at the Burgos meetings, and we hope to meet you personally again next year. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and see you soon.